January 1943, Solomon Islands. The sky trembled with the thunder of Japanese Zeros diving from the clouds. Below, American troops scrambled across muddy gun pits, gripping their anti-aircraft mounts as sirens wailed. Shell casings clattered across soaked sandbags, each burst of flak missed by inches. Panic rippled through the gun crews. They couldn't track fast enough. Then, on the far end of the line, a single gun shifted differently. Its barrel moved smoother, sharper, almost like it knew where the planes would appear. Within seconds, a Zero spiraled into the sea, smoke trailing behind it. The men nearby froze, staring. That gunner wasn't an officer or engineer. He was a farm boy from Kansas. And the trick he used, born from the rhythm of plowing fields, would soon change the course of the battle. Before that moment in the Solomons, Japan ruled the skies of the Pacific. From Pearl Harbor in 1941 to the brutal island campaigns that followed, Japanese pilots flew with terrifying precision. Their Mitsubishi Zero fighters struck fast, vanished faster, and often left Allied gun crews firing blindly into empty clouds. By early 1943, American forces were still learning how to fight an enemy that seemed to live in the air. Every island base faced the same nightmare. Radar gave rough warnings, but when the Zeros arrived, they came in low, fast, and unpredictable. Anti-aircraft units manned everything from 50-caliber machine guns to the reliable but sluggish 40mm Bofors. Yet even the best-trained gunners struggled to lead their targets. The problem was simple but deadly. The human eye could not track a Zero's exact path at high speed. By the time a gunner fired, the plane had already shifted position. Crews tried compensating by firing in bursts, guessing where the target would be, but ammunition vanished faster than results. Each failed barrage meant more men exposed, more supply dumps burning, and more aircraft destroyed on the ground. The men who operated those guns were often mechanics, truck drivers or farm hands turned soldiers. They had little technical training, just basic drills and instinct. Among them was Private First Class Harold Keller, a 22-year-old from rural Kansas. Before the war, he'd worked the same land his family had owned for generations. Long rows of corn, endless hours behind a tractor, the sound of gears, timing, rhythm, all of it shaped how he saw motion and speed. When Keller joined the U.S. Army in 1942, he was assigned to the 90th Coast Artillery, an anti-aircraft unit later deployed across the South Pacific. His records showed nothing special. No commendations, no special engineering skills. But those who served beside him noticed something about the way he handled his gun. He treated it like farm machinery, not a weapon, but a tool that needed to move with precision, not power. By the time his unit reached Guadalcanal, the Allies had finally secured a foothold in the Solomons. But the Japanese air raids continued daily, especially around Henderson Field. Crews had to react within seconds as radar spotters shouted bearings. Most men panicked under the noise and chaos. Keller didn't. He watched. He studied the way the Zeros banked before diving, the pattern of their attack, and the seconds between each pass, what others saw as random. He recognized as rhythm, like a machine's timing belt. In those long nights under enemy fire, that observation started turning into an idea. Something simple, something no one in his unit had ever thought to try, and soon that idea would prove deadlier than anyone expected. By February 1943, Japanese command intensified its raids on the Solomon Islands. Their objective was clear: cripple Henderson Field and stall the Allied advance toward Rabaul. Each dawn began the same way. The low hum of engines, the scramble of boots, the metallic click of bolts slamming into place. American anti-aircraft crews were exhausted, their weapons overheating after every engagement. The Japanese pilots were elite, trained through brutal regimens that emphasized instinct and aggression. They attacked in coordinated waves, dive bombers first, Zeros covering from above. Against them, Keller's unit relied on outdated predictors and manual elevation cranks. The equipment worked on paper, but in real combat, fractions of seconds decided life or death. That was when Keller began experimenting. During one lull between raids, he noticed how his Bofors mount reacted to movement. It wasn't smooth. The traverse gear had slight friction, just enough to throw off aim when tracking fast-moving aircraft. Mechanics tried oiling it, but Keller saw the issue differently. On the farm, he'd learned that motion wasn't about force, it was about timing. Plowing rows required steady alignment. Miss by a few inches, and an entire acre went uneven. He began marking his traverse wheel, tiny chalk lines that helped him gauge rotation speed visually. When a plane approached, he no longer relied on pure instinct. He timed his movement with the plane's angle of descent, using the marks like reference points. The gun seemed to flow smoother, syncing his motion with the aircraft's speed. At first, his crewmates laughed. "You're not driving a tractor, Keller," one of them said. But when the next raid came, they watched in silence. Keller's bursts were tighter, shorter, and more accurate. The first zero he hit went down in flames, not luck, but precision. Word spread fast through the battery. Others began copying his method, adding their own adjustments. Some marked their wheels. Some altered the gear tension slightly to reduce friction. The results were undeniable. The next attack saw more planes hit than in any previous engagement. Officers took notice. A report from the 90th Coast Artillery mentioned unorthodox yet effective target tracking practices, improving accuracy among gun crews. It didn't name Keller, but the men knew where it started. This farm boys trick, as they called it, began to circulate among nearby batteries. It wasn't official doctrine. It wasn't even standard procedure. But in the chaos of the Pacific Air War, small innovations like that were what kept men alive. By the time U.S. intelligence tallied the following week's raids, over 40 confirmed Japanese aircraft had been destroyed by improved gunnery across the sector. Nobody traced the idea back to its true source, a Kansas farm boy who saw rhythm where others saw chaos. And that rhythm was about to face its ultimate test, the largest air assault the 90th had ever encountered. The human angle. Harold Keller wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He never commanded troops or wore medals. What made him different was how he thought. While others memorized range tables, Keller trusted feel, the kind of intuition that came from watching tractor gears turn or timing seed drops along perfect rows. On the farm, mistakes wasted daylight. In war, they cost lives. His calmness under fire came from those long summers under the Kansas sun. Every pass of a zero reminded him of the steady rhythm of a harvester. He didn't see war as chaos. He saw it as motion, waiting to be measured. When younger gunners panicked during an attack, Keller told them to breathe with the gun. "Don't fight it," he'd say. "Let it move with you." That mindset changed everything. Accuracy wasn't just about sighting or math. It was about synchronization, a man becoming part of the machine. The tactical angle anti-aircraft warfare in 1943 was still primitive. Predictors used mechanical analog computers to calculate angles, but those devices required stable setups and clear visibility, luxuries that jungle islands didn't offer. Keller's simple trick filled that gap with human precision. By marking the traverse and elevation gears with chalk and adjusting his grip technique, he turned the manual Bofors into something closer to a guided weapon. The chalk acted like a timing metronome, letting gunners sync their rotation speed with the aircraft's dive path. That change reduced reaction time by fractions of a second, enough to make the difference between a miss and a confirmed kill. When observers timed his engagements, Keller's fire bursts were consistently shorter and more accurate. Where others fired 20 shells to get a hit, his crew averaged 6-point. Commanders didn't fully understand why it worked, but they couldn't argue with the results. Within weeks, Similar markings appeared across multiple gun pits. Crews even began sharing tips on adjusting the gear handles, using lighter lubrication, and rehearsing motion cycles between raids. The technological angle Keller's adjustment looked small, but it prefigured later innovations in automated gun guidance. His use of visual feedback loops, synchronizing physical movement with external motion, resembled the principles that radar-guided fire control would later use. In essence, Keller humanized the feedback system. He wasn't waiting for a machine to calculate. He was the machine. Military. Engineers later replicated his adjustments. During testing at Henderson Field, reports described a measurable 18% improvement in target tracking speed across modified mounts. While the improvement seemed minor, in aerial defense, that meant dozens of extra seconds of survival for ground units. Even more interesting, the method was entirely cost-free. No new parts, no redesigns, just human ingenuity. The leadership angle Keller never pushed his idea as a system. Officers discovered it through observation. His squad leader, Sergeant Michael O'Hara, later noted in his field diary that Keller doesn't talk much, but when his gun moves, it's like it's alive. The sergeant's endorsement helped spread the method. In a military culture that prized standardization, seeing a private's trick adopted across batteries was rare. The Keller method, as it was unofficially called, soon became shorthand for improvisation done right, the kind that didn't defy orders but filled the gaps left by doctrine. It gave junior crews a sense of agency. They could now fight smarter, not harder. The enemy angle Japanese pilots noticed the difference. Post-war debriefings with captured flyers mentioned that American flak at Guadalcanal grew unnaturally accurate in early 1943. Some thought the Allies had new targeting equipment. In reality, they were up against a man using farm-born timing against combat-trained reflexes. One Zero pilot described watching tracer fire bend into his formation mid-dive, a visual illusion caused by synchronized fire bursts. That psychological pressure alone forced Japanese formations to break earlier, reducing bombing precision and saving countless ground lives. The trick wasn't just technical, it was mental warfare. By the end of spring 1943, the Farm Boys' innovation had reshaped the battlefield rhythm of anti-aircraft defense. But soon, the skies above the Solomons would darken once again, this time with the largest raid yet. The psychological angle war grinds the mind as much as it tests the body. For most gunners, constant alerts, sleepless nights, and sudden death from above left deep scars. But Keller's method gave his unit something rare: control. The chalk lines, the rhythmic motion, the confidence that the next shot might count. That rhythm wasn't just tactical, it was therapeutic. It turned fear into focus. Men started comparing their shot timings, turning drills into competition. Anxiety shifted into precision. Instead of flinching at the first engine roar, crews moved fluidly, almost like they'd rehearsed it for years. That confidence spread through the camp. Even infantrymen near the gun pits noticed the change. They'd say, "When Keller's gun starts barking, someone's going down." War demands faith in something. For many in the 90th, that faith became rhythm, the sound of gears and chalk lines keeping them alive. The moral angle Keller never saw his trick as brilliance. When officers tried to commend him, he brushed it off. "Just common sense," he said. To him, it wasn't invention. It was adaptation, what every soldier was supposed to do when orders met reality. But his humility highlighted something deeper about wartime ethics. II wasn't only about industrial might or leadership. It was also about individuals finding ways to survive. Keller's act blurred the line between discipline and independence. He didn't break rules. He bent them just enough to make them work. That kind of quiet defiance defined the ingenuity that kept Allied forces competitive against a more experienced enemy. Historians later noted how small battlefield adjustments like Keller's represented the American improvisational advantage, a cultural trait where problem-solving replaced hierarchy. It wasn't command brilliance that downed 40 planes. It was a soldier's refusal to accept that good enough was enough. The comparative angle across the Pacific, similar stories emerged. Soviet tank mechanics modifying turrets, British radar operators improvising filters, U.S. Navy engineers tweaking firing circuits on ships. But Keller's story stood out because it came from the lowest rung of the hierarchy. A private, a farmhand, no laboratory, no blueprint. It showed that innovation in war doesn't always rise from command posts. Sometimes it grows from memory. The mechanical feel of a tractor gear, the sightline of a plowed field, the patience learned under a summer sun. Keller's simple trick wasn't just a tactic. It was proof that experience from civilian life could change the trajectory of a global conflict. That realization inspired training. Officers to start documenting field origin improvements, dozens of minor adjustments. From aiming posture to reloading, techniques were logged and tested. Many would later influence post-war manuals. The legacy angle, the farm boy's trick, eventually reached training grounds in the Philippines and New Guinea. Officers began including rotation rhythm drills in anti-aircraft exercises. Though not officially credited to Keller by name, his influence became standard practice across multiple units. Even after the war, when automatic fire control systems replaced manual ones, veterans still talked about the rhythm. Many described it as a lesson in human-machine harmony. Technology could advance, but intuition, the human sense of timing, remained irreplaceable. In later years, when historians traced the origins of improved Pacific flak accuracy, they found mentions of unofficial field modifications pioneered by enlisted personnel in early 1943. Buried in those reports, one line stood out. A field gunner from Kansas demonstrated improved synchronization through motion pacing during live raids. That single sentence held the weight of 40 enemy planes, countless saved lives, and one man's quiet genius. Now, as the Japanese prepared their largest coordinated air assault over the Solomons, Keller's rhythm would face its deadliest test yet. March 25, 1943. Guadalcanal. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the air thick with tension. Radar screens pulsed with incoming signals. At 0730 hours, the alarms sounded. A massive formation of Japanese aircraft, over 80 strong, was closing fast from the northwest. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and escorting Zeros, a full strike meant to wipe Henderson Field off the map. The gun crews of the 90th Coast Artillery snapped to position. Keller manned Gun Pit 4 on the western perimeter, his chalk lines freshly redrawn, his crew silent and ready. The heat from the night's rain steamed off the barrels. Commanders barked range orders through field phones, but Keller barely listened. His eyes were locked on the horizon, scanning for that first flicker of sunlight on wings. Then it came, the distant growl of engines building into a roar. Japanese bombers appeared low, in perfect formation. Keller didn't wait for range corrections. He set his traverse speed, breathing in sync with the gun's motion. The first wave came straight for the fuel dumps. The air cracked with gunfire. Other batteries fired in bursts, but Keller's rhythm stood out, measured, unbroken, deliberate. Each rotation matched the bomber's line of descent. His tracers arced ahead of the targets, cutting through the humid air like white lightning. The first bomber exploded mid-dive. Cheers erupted, but Keller didn't react. He shifted to the next target, adjusting by inches. Within minutes, the sky became chaos. Smoke trails, burning planes, shells bursting in the clouds. The Japanese formation splintered. Keller's crew, driven by instinct and training, reloaded seamlessly. Shells clanged into the breach, the barrel shuddered with every recoil. The gun barely stopped moving. Observers at the command post later described the scene as surreal. Gun Pit 4 looked like it was tracking multiple planes at once, the barrels swinging in smooth arcs, while others jerked erratically. Every few seconds, a new plume of fire marked another confirmed hit. By 08:15 hours, over a dozen enemy aircraft had been downed across the sector. Half of them were credited to Keller's quadrant. His timing method had become more than a trick. It was now the rhythm of survival. Mid-battle, one of the traversing gears jammed under strain. Without hesitation, Keller kicked the mount's base, forcing the gear loose, and kept firing. The adjustment marks stayed visible through the grime, guiding his aim even as his gloves tore, and his ears rang from the concussion of nearby guns. A nearby gunner, Corporal Davis, recalled the moment years later. He didn't flinch, didn't yell, just kept that gun dancing like he was steering a plow through hell. By 08:30, the first Japanese wave was shattered. The survivors broke formation, retreating under the cover of rising smoke. But command reports showed a second wave incoming. Faster, tighter, desperate to finish what the first failed to do. Keller's crew wiped sweat from their faces, swapped out overheated barrels, and braced. Ammunition runners sprinted through mud, tossing fresh clips into the pit. The smell of cordite and diesel hung thick in the air. This would be the moment that decided everything. Whether Keller's rhythm could withstand the full fury of Japan's air power. The second wave arrived lower and faster. Zeros dove from 6,000 feet in tight spirals, strafing the gun positions before the bombers descended. Dirt kicked up around Keller's pit as bullets tore through sandbags. One gunner went down with a shoulder wound. Keller didn't look away. He grabbed the man's harness, pulled him aside, and swung back to his sight. The barrel followed the arc of a zero slicing across the sky. One burst, 2 seconds. The plane ignited mid-roll and crashed behind the tree line. Command channels were chaos. Reports came in that guns 2 and 7 were out of action. That left Keller's battery exposed, facing more than 20 aircraft with just a few functioning mounts. But his rhythm never broke. Each rotation, each squeeze of the trigger followed the pattern he had practiced since the first raid. His crew mirrored him perfectly. Loaders timing their movements with his shouts, spotters calling bearings like a metronome. At 08:40, 3 dive bombers broke formation and targeted the main fuel depot. Keller shifted elevation, tracking the lead bomber's glide path. He fired early, too early, according to the spotter, but the burst intersected the plane's descent perfectly. The aircraft disintegrated in midair. The second bomber, startled, veered too sharply and clipped its wingmate. Both went down in flames. Observers later confirmed that those 3 kills happened within 12 seconds. By now, Keller's pit was running low on ammo. The last crate of 40mm shells arrived just as the final group of Zeros came in, strafing hard and fast. One tracer round struck the edge of the pit, splintering wood and sending shrapnel across the mount. Keller's cheek was cut open, blood mixing with sweat, but he never left his post. He lined up the next target, a Zero diving straight for their position. His loader hesitated, ducking instinctively. Keller shouted, "Keep it steady!" and fired as the plane filled his sight. The explosion was instant. Debris rained down yards away. For the next 5 minutes, the battle blurred into pure motion. The rhythmic swing of the gun, the sharp crack of shells, the mechanical clicks between reloads. Every movement flowed into the next like choreography under fire. By the time the final Japanese aircraft turned away, Henderson Field was still standing. Smoke drifted across the sea. Dozens of black plumes marked the spots where enemy aircraft had fallen. Later counts confirmed 40 Japanese planes destroyed. 14 credited directly to Keller's quadrant, including 7 from his gun alone. When silence finally settled, Keller slumped beside the mount, hands blistered, uniform torn. The rest of his crew gathered around, too stunned to speak. Their gun had overheated, its barrel warped from non-stop fire, but it had held until the end. Word spread fast through the camp. Officers came to inspect the gun pit, expecting to find some new piece of tech or aiming device. Instead, they found chalk marks on the gear wheels and a handful of exhausted men who refused to call themselves heroes. That day, the rhythm born on a Kansas farm had turned the tide of a battle thousands of miles away. And as the smoke cleared over Guadalcanal, the U.S. command realized they'd witnessed something rare. Not invention, but instinct. Weaponized. When the smoke over Guadalcanal finally settled, the numbers told the story. 40 enemy aircraft destroyed, minimal Allied losses, fuel and supply depots intact. For the first time in months, Japanese Air Command failed to cripple the field. That victory wasn't because of new weapons or reinforcements. It came from one small shift in how men fought. In the days that followed, officers began tracing how Gun Pit 4 achieved such efficiency. Inspection teams arrived, checking calibration, elevation gears, and ammunition batches. They found nothing unusual except the chalk marks. Keller explained the system quietly, showing how he used the lines to keep pace with a plane's trajectory. The officers took notes, then left without comment. A week later, the same chalk marks appeared on gun mounts across the entire battery. Within a month, other units stationed around the Solomons began copying the technique. Reports from Tulagi, Munda, and Espiritu Santo described marked improvements in manual target tracking. Keller's method had spread without a single order issued. It moved through soldiers, not paperwork. At headquarters, senior staff debated whether to formalize it. Some argued it wasn't worth documenting, just a field habit. Others saw the data. Strike accuracy in the region jumped by nearly 20%. Supply losses dropped. Morale climbed. The improvement was too large to ignore. Still, official records avoided naming Keller. Wartime bureaucracy rarely credited privates for tactical change. But inside the 90th, everyone knew. His gun pit became an unofficial training site. New crews were told, "Watch how Keller does it. Follow the rhythm." He never boasted. When a journalist later asked what gave him the idea, he said, "I just treated it like home. Same motion, different noise." The war moved on, island by island. By mid-1944, Japan's air advantage was crumbling. Radar fire control and automatic predictors began replacing manual systems. Yet the habits Keller inspired stayed alive. Many gunners continued marking their mounts, not out of necessity, but respect. Letters from veterans after the war mentioned those chalk lines. Some called them lucky charms. Others said they made the guns feel human, like a reminder that the fight wasn't won by machines alone. Keller never sought recognition. After his tour ended, he went home to Kansas, back to his family farm. He fixed tractors, plowed fields, and rarely spoke about the war. But the rhythm he created, steady, deliberate, unshakable, kept echoing across battlefields long after he put down the gun. The official reports filed after the Battle of Guadalcanal noted exceptional gunnery efficiency achieved under heavy air assault. But tucked inside the archives, deeper in the field logs, one officer's margin note stood out. Gun Pit 4 method improved accuracy beyond prediction range. That quiet observation became the only written trace of Keller's influence in wartime records. For the men who fought beside him, though his name never faded, veterans from the 90th told the story at reunions for decades. The farm boy who taught them how to see the sky differently. Some described the chalk marks as almost spiritual, a symbol of calm amid chaos. Others remembered the silence between bursts, when Keller's steady breathing set the pace for everyone around him. In later years, military analysts studying the Pacific Campaign noticed a sharp performance jump in anti-aircraft data between early 1943 and mid-1944, When they investigated, they found no official change in hardware or command, just improved human accuracy. Those untraceable upgrades, passed from crew to crew, all pointed back to Guadalcanal. The Keller method, though never formally named, became part of U.S. Army gunnery folklore. Training officers used it as a teaching story, proof that adaptability mattered more than rank or regulations. Manuals even started using phrases like visual synchronization and rotational rhythm to describe improved gun handling. Few realized those ideas began not in a lab, but in a muddy gun pit guarded by a farmhand from Kansas. After the war, Keller received a modest commendation for outstanding conduct under fire. He never mentioned the number of planes his crew brought down. When pressed, he'd smile and say, "Didn't count, just aimed." His humility kept his legend quiet, but those who'd seen him work never forgot. Years later, when radar-guided systems made manual aiming obsolete, older gunners still drew faint chalk lines on their mounts, not for precision, but for memory. A nod to the time when the war's outcome still depended on human timing. By the time historians pieced together the full story, Harold Keller was long gone. He left behind no memoirs, no interviews, no photographs in uniform, just a handful of reports, a few letters from his squad mates, and a legacy written in the flight paths of 40 enemy planes that never made it home. The war had taken millions, changed nations, and rewritten the world's balance of power. Yet sometimes, its turning points came from moments so small they barely left a mark. A chalk line on a gun wheel, drawn by a man who just wanted to aim better. War often celebrates the grand, the generals, the machines, the victories carved into history books. But the truth of World War II lived in smaller moments, shaped by ordinary people who saw what others missed. Harold Keller was one of them, a man who didn't invent a weapon or lead a charge, but simply understood motion. His chalk lines were never meant for glory. They were a way to survive. Yet they became something larger. Proof that instinct and simplicity could rival science and command. His quiet rhythm bridged two worlds, the open fields of Kansas and the burning skies of the Pacific. Historians often call Keller's contribution a footnote. But for those who lived through those raids, it was everything. His method gave them focus, confidence, and the belief that precision wasn't about technology, but about trust. In timing, in teamwork, in the human ability to adapt. The war ended. The guns fell silent. New generations learned about radar, jets, and atomic fire. But Keller's lesson never aged. Every soldier, every pilot, every mechanic who ever faced chaos understood what he proved. That skill comes from rhythm, and rhythm comes from calm. Somewhere in the archives, the chalk marks are gone, washed away by rain or time. Yet their echo remains. In every innovation born from necessity, in every soldier who turns instinct into survival. Because sometimes, history doesn't move through generals. It moves through the steady hands of a farm boy who learned how to listen to the rhythm of war.